Hello, everyone, and welcome to another edition of Clock Talk with Dr. Greg Brennan. So, Greg, today we're going to talk about the state of healthcare in the U.S.
Easy topic.
So, obviously, you built a tremendous business over the last 4 or 5 years as being an alternative to traditional healthcare. We've talked before in various Clock Talks about low testosterone, what's causing that in the U.S. But it seems to me that a lot of the traditional healthcare, I'll say in this case, conglomerates, the various medical systems that have gone out and bought, the mom and pop practices and the individual doctor practices. Medicine has absolutely changed in the last 7 or 8 years.
During my career too, Jim. Definitely.
So I'm going to try to focus on cardiovascular today as an example of what that looks like. But just from I guess to start this whole thing, what does traditional medical school, what did it look like when you went, and what does it look like today? And why are the doctors that are being produced today maybe not, or why aren't they doing, I guess, similar diagnostics to what you would do in the old days?
Yeah, Jim, it's interesting because you think that a lot of doctors are scientists per se. And I know I'm not a scientist. I read a lot of science work. You memorize biochemistry or organic chemistry, biology, and we apply it. And I think the medical training we have in America is very good. It's called allopathic. But we miss, like I took no classes on nutrition. I took no classes on vitamins. I didn't look at as food being medicine. And prior to the Flex Report of 1909, America healthcare was very variant. You had chiropractors, osteopathic, orthopedics, allopathic, you had all that. But the Rockefeller Foundation with the Flex Report started pushing their view of it. And again, I'm not anti that view. I've been very fortunate to do medical work around the world, in the Congo, in South America, Central America. I've been very fortunate. And what's interesting is that healthcare, preventive healthcare, we may not be good at, because we get people involved that tell us we should eat certain things that we find 30, 40 years later, we're not healthy. And having 6,000 years of human history have shown red meat's good, eggs are good. There's some benefits we should know about that. So you ask why. There's a very good book by Mark Richard called Nobody Wants You Healthy. He was one of Obama's White House physicians, and he talks about that. He says, this before COVID numbers, about $2 trillion a year is spent in healthcare in America, and 90% of that is on chronic diseases. And he talks about in the book how he knew nothing about testosterone pellets. And in 2006, he first found out about that. He goes, keeping testosterone levels optimal can decrease diabetes, prostate cancer, breast cancer. He makes a very good point in his books. But it's very interesting about, you talk about healthcare. He was talking about 75% of scientific articles, peer-reviewed articles, are not reproducible in other labs. So that you start questioning the validity of these things. So that's why I think it's important that we must question as client. We're all patients. But the most important, decider what you do your body is in the mirror.
So regarding the studies that aren't reproducible, is he saying that because people have tried and they can't reproduce the results?
Yes, 100%.
And then where are those studies? Do you have to dig deep in Google to find them?
That's the problem, Jim, is what are you reading? Is it true or not? Is there a biasness? I forgot her name, but she was the editor of the New England Journal. And she actually got released because she says, I can't trust this data. And a doctor, I want to say is Ivaroni at Stanford, says he can make any paper say what they want to say by juggling numbers. And that's what's important here, is that's why we have to go back to common. What's the biochemistry do? I'll go over a little bit on cholesterol in a minute as an example.
Yeah, so let's go to that. So take myself, I'll take some friends of mine, go get an annual physio every year, people in their 50s, and, cholesterol, LDL is, let's say it's 170 or 180, and HDL might be, in some cases, 40 or 50, and then in other cases, 70 to 80. Triglycerides look good and everything else. But because that overall total cholesterol number is over 200, seems like a lot of doctors just simply want to prescribe statins at that point in time. And then I look at it and say, hey, wait a second. If the whole world's been on statins for the last 25 years, why is heart disease still the number one killer in America? So
good question.
So I'm setting you up, but like, what's going on? Like, why do they think that way when over here, at least, we're told cholesterol is good. A lot of books that we read are told cholesterol is good for you. prevents Alzheimer's, et cetera, et cetera. Body needs it. So I'm going to let you run with that. But that's what I think the conflict, because you go one spot and you're told something totally different than what you would have done if you went someplace else.
Right. Relative risk and absolute risk are two different things. Relative risk, these numbers are 30% relative risk. When we look at absolute risk, it's 1 in a million. That's what's important to understand. Dr. Mark Houston, he runs the Hypertensive Institute over in Nashville. He has a great book on cardiovascular disease. And the bottom line, cardiovascular disease is inflammation. I'm going to actually summarize some of his book. Dr. David Diamond, who's a neurophysiologist at University of South Florida, his videos are online everywhere. And Dr. Ali Nadir, a cardiologist, his videos are as well. I'm just going to draw a picture of what cholesterol does. Before statins, before anything else, and this comes from Dr. Ali Nadir's videos, great, because this makes there's certain things we have to understand, okay? Every single cell in the body has cholesterol. Every single cell has cholesterol. In fact, when you look at the body, we'll call this a cell membrane, okay? That's a cell membrane. This is, we'll call it the inside, and this is the outside. That is protein, fat, okay? When this opens up and releases, and these fats exposed to oxygen, that causes free radical formation. But in the cell membrane, 50% of the cell membrane, also another molecule that runs through this. Cholesterol. Cholesterol is like the rebar through the membrane. That's one function it does. Another thing it does is, this is very important, is our brain is roughly 98% cholesterol. Myelin sheath, about 90% cholesterol. So what happens is you have this chemical called acetyl-CoA, which becomes HMOG-CoA, which becomes malonic acid. And the why I'm bringing that up is statins block that. That's what statins block. Well, the question should be, what does that become? Because we know if you take a statin, it increases diabetes roughly 30%, overall cancer about 36%, it increases dementia in some studies about 70%. It does lower cholesterol, and it does lower LDL. But these things do occur. This is from Dr. Ali Nadir's presentation. It's fantastic. So he says, okay, this becomes a thing called isopentanol, which becomes glucuronidase, becomes our immune system. So when that's messed up, that's our cancer. It becomes a thing called glycolic acid, which becomes our insulin receptors. There's your diabetes. It becomes a thing called squalene, which becomes cholesterol, which becomes that membrane I talked about. It becomes CoQ10, which is the energy source within mitochondria. So when you block this, there's a cascade event we must think about. And we don't apply sometimes the biochemistry to what these things do. And oh, by the way, the Japanese study and the American study, the NANE study, has shown the higher one's cholesterol is, total cholesterol, higher one's LDL is, overall mortality decreases. Okay? That's what's very interesting, is because it does so many functions. Cholesterol is the first line of our immune system. I'm going to go how this works on the endothelium.
So let me stop you though. So you know this. Dr. Diamond knows this. A lot of doctors know this. Why don't all the other doctors know this?
I don't know, Jim, and I'm saying they do know this, but Greg, we've seen studies. When I was in school, cholesterol, 330 is considered high, now it's 220. And again, I can't stress the Japanese study in 2015 in the Journal of Metabolicism showed the largest series done, just what I said.
You have to share that data.
And show this, everything I said on that, show the data on this, that study shows the higher cholesterol, the higher LDL, less overall mortality, less cancer.
So in the old days, people were running around at 330 and they weren't given any drugs?
100%. And again, Dr. Diamond...
But were people dying of heart attacks back then?
Yes, but what's heart attack caused from? So the lining is very interesting. The blood vessels, one cell thick. It must be frictionless. Cholesterol brings a thing called sulfur that makes it frictionless. If cholesterol caused the issue, why does it only happen in arteries, not in veins? It happens in arteries where there's pressure, where bifurcation occurs. So the actual molecule itself is not even in the blood. It's wrapped in this protein called a particle, so it's actually could be dissolved in water, okay? And the more particles you have, the more chance of them running into the lining. That causes the inflammation, the damage. So it's a particle number is the issue, not the cholesterol. It's like if a taxi cab and you're a passenger in a taxi cab runs into a wall, the passenger is not the cause, right? It's the car itself, would say, who's driving on that. So that's the thing about it's a particle number. But what causes high particle numbers? Not cholesterol, sugar and genetics. So inflammation is the cause of atherosclerosis. The number one cause of inflammation is high sugar. And in 1977, they pushed the food pyramid. You could actually see heart attacks and things like that have increased in the 80s because of the increased sugar in our diet. Dr. Miller, Donald Miller is a famous cardiovascular surgeon, as well as Dr. DeBakey. They said blaming cholesterol for atherosclerosis is like blaming a fireman who actually has to put the fire out. The cells get damaged. What happened, LDL is just a type of cholesterol, that low density lipid that the liver makes when cells request it. Hey, we need cholesterol, send it as an LDL. Then it grabs it, called a receptor. The LDL receptor grabs it. Then what happens is it utilizes it, repackages it back in another particle called HDL. So high HDL particle is as bad as high LDL particle, not the LDL, the HDL, the particle themselves. And again, that's genetic or sugar, because that's the issue. It's the oxidation stress.
So if one has high cholesterol naturally, does that mean that the cells are requesting it on a more regular basis?
They might be, because the body needs that. Again, your liver makes between 2 and 4,000 milligrams a day, and if you are a vegan, your liver will make more. And when you eat cholesterol, you can't absorb cholesterol that's bound to what's called an ester. So if you eat cholesterol, you can't absorb it. You have to make it in your own liver. If it's unbound, your body will absorb it and use it. And then we pass it in the liver, in the gut, called bile. Bile is made out of cholesterol. Then your body redissolves it and brings it back in the body, called intrahepatic. The intra GI system brings it back in your body.
So what is unbound cholesterol?
Unbound is called a free cholesterol. So you can absorb those. It's in some of the food, but most food we eat is already bound to an ester, another fat.
Okay. So for the people out there like me, what's kind of
bottom line, cholesterol is made by your liver, and without cholesterol, you're dead.
I understand that, but I'm saying if you're going to eat unbound cholesterol, is that in meat, for example? Is that
meat and eggs? But again, most of it is still bound. That's mostly bound. And this is what's so important. Cholesterol is the most important molecule in the development of the baby in the womb. It's the most important development. There's no hormones, sex hormones, aldosterone, progesterone, testosterone, cortisol. It all comes from cholesterol. In the mitochondria, we have these. It's a battery called a proton gradient. One of the proteins you need is called CoQ10. Without that, you have no energy. These are things that's so important, Jim. When you ask the question, what other doctors don't know this? Jim, I know they know this. I understand that. I understand it's just multifactorial. The Harvard paper came out 4 or 5 weeks ago that said eating red meat doubles the risk of diabetes. The meat in the study was lasagna. See, that's why it's so important. We must look at the details of the study. That's what's important. But the bottom line in my mind, Jim, if your body makes this molecule, it's pretty vital for life.
Yeah. So again, at the end of the day, what's the patient to do?
Is to quiz the doctor and look at the studies and understand the word relative risk versus absolute risk. That's a huge difference.
All right.
And again, things you could change, Jim: lifestyle, eating, sleeping, hormone status.
As always, Whiteboard Challenge, Clock Talk with Dr. Greg Brennan.